Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. After the release of dozens of hostages over the weekend by Hamas, a 4-day truce in Gaza has been extended. According to the deal's main mediator, Qatar, 69 Israeli and foreign hostages and 150 Palestinian prisoners have been released, with more to be freed in the coming days. But just hours before the first hostages and prisoners were exchanged, Israel found itself locked in a diplomatic dispute with Spain and Belgium. Both their prime ministers heavily criticized the attacks on Gaza, prompting Israel to accuse the EU countries of supporting terrorism. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said that Madrid is open to unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state, even if it goes against the wishes of the EU. Meanwhile, Belgium's Prime Minister accused Israel of not abiding by the international law and indiscriminately killing thousands of children. The heavy back and forth resulted in Israel summoning the Belgian and Spanish ambassadors. EU countries were united in their condemnation of Hamas for the October 7 attacks, but have grown increasingly divided over Israel's disproportionate response. And to further discuss the truce in Gaza, joining me now from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Noor Odeh. She is a former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority. And from Istanbul is Vehbi Baysan. He's an associate professor at Ibn Haldun University. A warm welcome to you both, and thanks for joining me on Straight Talk. So, Noor, what could you tell us about the latest situation in Gaza, especially in the north, after a truce was reached on Friday between Israel and Hamas?
Well, the truce has given people a chance to, first and foremost, search for their family and loved ones and try to retrieve many who are still trapped under the rubble. There was also, as part of the agreement, aid that arrived for the first time to northern Gaza and some fuel, which will go a long way in trying to help provide basic services through the municipality. But the situation in the north continues to be quite precarious, and not enough assistance has arrived. The extension of the ceasefire is promising, especially for those in the north.
So, Vehbi, Qatar announced the truce had been extended by 2 days, as we all know. But how viable and sustainable is this? And do you believe that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is interested in listening to these brokers?
Well, the response is very slow, and Netanyahu himself made it very clear that what he calls, in his terms, is the war will continue, and it seems he's determined to do that, which means actually many more attacks continue after the truce ends. This is supposed to be a humanitarian kind of a little interruption or a little break for humanitarian reasons, and whatever humanitarian or humanity left in Gaza, that should be underlined. So, well, he says he's going to continue. So, of course, all our hopes and wishes and calls and international community calls for immediate ceasefire and then go into negotiation tables and see what's happening. Because currently half of Gaza already, I mean, Noor, I'm sorry, it's not for me to say, but half of Gaza already gone and destroyed and demolished. So I don't know. It seems it's going to continue.
So, Noor, what do you think? What will happen? I mean, when the truce ends, when all hostages are released? I mean, what's the Israeli endgame in Gaza, you think?
Well, a negotiation securing the release of all hostages has not yielded any results yet. We have to keep in mind that right now we are only talking about the women and children who are held captive in Gaza. The discussions, one would hope, that right now are happening quietly and away from media attention, is to discuss the remaining male hostages. There are civilians, but there are soldiers, and that is a completely different type of discussion in terms of who would be released in their exchange, what kind of deal would be reached, what kind of end game would end this war. That's a much more complicated effort, and I'm not sure that there's readiness right now to talk end game. I don't see enough international pressure yet to end this war, but I think that we will see perhaps one more extension to make sure that all the women and children are out, and then maybe a discussion about the older civilian men. But then after that, it's going to get very, very complicated.
So, VP, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has lashed out at calls for a two-state solution after Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez said his country is open to recognizing a Palestinian state, even if the European Union disagrees. So, how do you think it will play out?
Well, two-state solution was agreed upon after long negotiations in 1980s, and that became actually the norm in 1990s. A two-state solution and actually a peaceful existence, the two nations together. But we know that for whatever reasons, I don't want to blame anybody here, but especially the Netanyahu's policies worked against this. They made sure that two-state solution would never actually happen. So because he based himself, the policies against continuous abuse and attack on Palestinians, so he wants to delay it as much possible. But what matters here is the Israeli public opinion, and it seems it's changing. And now they're blaming Netanyahu that it was him solely responsible all the 7 October attacks. So that's why two-state solution is the only viable solution, both for Palestinians and Israelis there on the ground.
So, Noor, is there a suitable way for Spain to recognize Palestine as a state, given the half of Gaza is razed to the ground and the West Bank is pretty much occupied?
Well, occupation doesn't take away from the Spain's right to recognize Palestine as a state. Already 140 countries have done that, and that step would go a long way in, affirming or telling Israel, sending a very clear message that the world does not recognize Israel's borders beyond the 1967 Green Line, which is very significant because, as your guest, as the professor was saying, Israel has rejected ending the occupation. It has rejected the two-state formula, which is the international formula. It is not exactly a just formula. This is not a formula that divides historical Palestine into two equal states. This is barely 22% of historical Palestine. And it's what Palestinians have accepted as a way to have peace, to have independence, and to end this prolonged injustice. But Netanyahu and the Israeli right are committed to making that an impossibility. And without international pressure, talking about a two-state solution doesn't really mean much.
So Israel has also faced criticism from Belgium, the United Kingdom, and Italy. But one Western voice was very critical of Israel recently was EU Commission President Joseph Borrell, who has said on X that I'm appalled to learn that in the middle of a war, the Israeli government is poised to commit new funds to build more illegal settlements. This is not self-defense and will not make Israel safer. The settlements are grave international humanitarian law breach and they're Israel's greatest security liability. So, Vepi, what do you make of this statement? I mean, is pressure mounting on Israel?
Well, the pressure is always there. If Israel or the Israeli politicians, especially the right wing, willing to take on. But let's remember, Aisha, is that EU already issued a law or regulation saying that anything produced under the occupied territories has to be labeled as it is, not as made in Israel. So that's very significant. And we can see that the international community really there to assist as well, whatever the peaceful solution. But Israel's policy so far seems to be to grab as much land as possible. I mean, we cannot just justify it by calling it illegal. This is stealing someone else's land and then building there this innocent term, the settlements like we're talking about over 100,000 people. And I think they want to create a de facto reason that where are all these people going to go? So then it should be Israeli land. Well, this is unacceptable. And the sector seems that the continuing problem while taking the farmlands or destroying the olive trees in the region, destroying the economy and destroying people's livelihoods just to build anything that would Israel in the future, in their hope, they would grab.
So, no, EU Commission President Borrell also said at a recent meeting that there will be no peace and security for Israel without the creation of a Palestinian state. So does Netanyahu government actually risk losing Western support it had enjoyed since the beginning of this conflict?
Well, not yet. I don't think that the West is ready to really take the significant actions that they would need. I think there will be mounting pressure on Netanyahu, but to be honest with you, over the past decades, we have seen Europe shy away from its enormous ability to affect change in the Middle East, and been willing to relegate themselves to people who offer financial assistance and technical assistance to the Palestinians and Israelis without really using their leverage. Europe is Israel's largest trading partner, and the labeling the products from stolen land as products from stolen land was a good step a few years ago. Now it's time to talk about consequences, to talk about sanctions, to talk about banning these products, about not accepting to deal with officials who reside in settlements and commit a war crime according to the Rome Statutes. There are very real steps that Europe can take and that the United States can take, quite frankly, to not just respect international law and support Palestinian rights, but to also protect their own interests. They have an interest in maintaining a strong Israel, and Israel will not be strong or secure so long as it continues its colonization and oppression of the Palestinians. That's really the political calculus of it. And we need to see if they're willing to do what it takes to save Israel from itself and from the right-wing agenda of its politicians.
So, VP, what do you think? I mean, what will it take for the international community to take a solid stance against Israel's disproportionate attacks on civilians? I mean, how many more people have to be killed before this happens?
Well, Aisha, unfortunately, we have seen it before that international community is quite, or the decision makers, let's put it that way, quite slow in action. As you said, how many more innocent people, babies, children, elderly, ill, disabled, you name it, has to be killed. So they can, if at all, they would take an action, because it seems now Israel is given an open check, is just do whatever you want. And we know that the US is as well supporting that. And they just approved that those ammunition to be used also when needed, the spare ones that America seems to be storing somewhere in Israel. So that means there are more innocent lives will be lost. But of course, the settlement question, I'll go back to Aisha, is that they're building all these, and then especially the right-wing politicians, given this whole sense of security, those people there, as if everything is fine and there will be, it's not a war zone, but they create the war zone in the region. So we have to remember that. And unfortunately, as Noor said quite rightly, the pressure is not enough. Something else has to be done to stop these killings.
All right, Vehbi and Noor, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.